Hello and welcome along to the Open Newsroom. My name is Christine Bohan. I'm the Deputy Editor of the Journal and I work on the Good Information Project, where this month we're talking about the relationship between Ireland, the UK and the EU post-Brexit. You may know that every month, as part of the Good Information Project, we pick one big critical issue that matters to our audience. We find out what questions you like answered and hopefully equip you with the skills to seek out good information about it. Now, we picked this topic this month after all of the drama over whether or not Boris Johnson's government was actually going to trigger Article 16, which you may well remember from just a few short weeks ago. And it's beginning to look increasingly likely that after 5 years of debating what Brexit should look like in practice, that these big regular public disagreements between the EU and the UK are just how things are going to be from now on. All these threats, the showdowns, the diplomatic flare-ups, they've all just become a customary part of the news cycle at this stage. And it all puts Ireland in a tricky position as we try to navigate ourselves on the global stage independently of the UK, while also maintaining a good relationship with our closest neighbour. So we wanted to dig into these things, look at where everything is at right now, and what we can expect Brexit to look like in 2022. So to discuss this, I'm joined for this Open Newsroom by our team of reporters who are working on this topic this month, Ronan Duffy, Ian Curran and Gráinne Ní. So if you have any questions for them or comments, please do throw them into the chat wherever you're watching and we'll try to get to them towards the end. Guys, it's great to have you all here. Thanks so much for being here this afternoon. Gráinne, can I start with you? You've been covering Brexit for a long time now. How would you say that the situation right now, the current situation, compares to how Brexit has been in the past? Because I suppose it seems like there's more ill will, there's more bad tempers around at the moment, but is that fair or am I just kind of misremembering how things were before this?
Yeah, it's hard to hark back to 4 years ago when we were kind of talking about Brexit. I think one big thing that's different, if we start with that, is the public buy-in on Brexit. Everybody sees it as a done thing and something that has happened, even though there's some issues about post and trade that are still ongoing, and every single trade rule that there is under the protocol and under the Brexit deal hasn't come into play yet. So we haven't seen the full thrust of Brexit in Ireland yet. In terms of relations between, say, the EU and the UK, there is still a lot of rhetoric that we would have seen as part of negotiations, a kind of a negotiating tactic, kind of firing back and forth between the two sides. And there might be some surprise that that's still going on, to the full extent of what it had been. From Ireland's perspective, there's still, you can see some frustrations from the Irish government when they're responding to Brexit queries that we have a Brexit deal. We are trusting in that. The British government signed up to it. That's all very much like, we've done this. We're not going back there. And, that's the end of it. So, where things go from here, I suppose, depends on kind of the details of the protocol and also the political environment. It's really hard to talk about this objectively without getting into the politics of the UK in particular, because that has dictated, obviously, Brexit, the reason why Brexit happened, but also what kind of Brexit we got out of it in the end is all based on the political atmosphere at the UK.
Yeah. You talked about how we haven't seen the full thrust of Brexit yet, but do you see there being more potential flashpoints next year than there have been already this year? Or do you think things are more likely to kind of calm down and kind of come back from the brink a bit?
I think we saw more this year than I was even expecting. So I'm going to go for more again next year. But it's
more drama, not less.
It is so hard to tell, because you would have thought during a pandemic that attentions would have been diverted entirely from Brexit towards kind of health and building relations and climate change and these huge questions that need to be responded to by political establishments. And it's still grabbing headlines quite regularly. So, the Northern Ireland elections in particular will be a flashpoint next, or kind of a big, I suppose, deadline, or a big event that both the UK and Ireland will keep a close eye on, because both sides have, as one person put it to me, both the UK government and the Irish government are claiming to speak on Northern Ireland's behalf and are saying different things. So depending on the result of that election, that might change that game, to call it that, a little bit. that'll be a kind of a big event where both sides will start talking about the protocol and Brexit a bit more. And then you have grace periods as well, the full thrust of which haven't come in. That'll be another January issue. And I'd imagine grace periods that keep getting extended will still get extended into the new year as well.
Okay, so a bit of Groundhog Day perhaps for us in 2022 with themes coming up again. Ian, I'm going to jump to you a little bit just to talk about how Brexit has impacted Ireland specifically, and getting into the numbers a bit. Can you speak about how Ireland's trade with Northern Ireland has changed as a result of Brexit? Like, is it better? Is it worse? And then kind of the same for the UK and Europe. Like, what impact has this literally had on Ireland and the numbers for Ireland?
Yeah, I suppose this is something I've been looking into over the last couple of weeks, and I mean, it turned out to be very good timing because the CSO external trade statistics came out and last week, and I suppose they're actually quite arresting, and they've kind of shown what we've sort of seen in individual releases over the last year or so. And I suppose the other interesting thing is that we now have, I suppose, 9 months of Brexit under our belts, and we have kind of a wealth of data, so we can actually make some conclusions about Brexit and its impact on trade. So that is interesting, and it's an important sort of component now that we didn't have 9 months ago, obviously. So, I mean, and they are quite striking, I suppose. The figures, what we see is that imports from Northern Ireland to the Republic are up 60% in the first 9 months of the year compared to the same period of 2020. Right. That's up to about like 2.6 billion euro, while exports to Northern Ireland from the Republic are up about 50%, or about 48% to 50%, which is valued at about 2.8 billion euro. So that's obviously quite a big increase in cross-border trade. And at the same time, what's interesting, I suppose, is that imports from Great Britain itself to Ireland have declined over the period by about 21%. So that's over the first 9 months of the year compared to the same 9 months last year. And meanwhile, obviously, direct trade with Europe is up, and we've had a few sort of a bit of evidence of this over the last few weeks, with Dublin Port released figures there recently that said that like overall trade, as in exports and imports, going from Dublin Port or to Dublin Port from Europe is up overall about 36% this year. So I guess we can kind of tell a few things from that. The first thing is that obviously it seems to be that Brexit seems to have strengthened relationships between businesses north and south. That's probably for a few different reasons. It might have something to do with sort of the general global supply chain issues that everybody's kind of experiencing at the moment. It's just harder to get things into ports and stuff like that. So businesses increasingly are kind of near sourcing. And I suppose, if you're in a business in the north, it's only a few miles down to the border, that sort of thing. That's near sourcing. You don't have to deal with the same sort of issues as you would trying to bring something in. So that's one issue. But I mean, really, I think what everybody thinks is that this is a Brexit issue. And the reason that Northern Irish businesses are having such a difficult time getting goods, particularly from Great Britain, well, there's a few different reasons. Of course, they have their own troubles around driver shortages and supply chain issues in Britain. So there's actually it's harder to move goods around Britain and then from Britain to Northern Ireland. But also because they're saying, a lot of Northern Irish businesses are saying that a lot of Great British businesses just aren't bothered sending goods to the north anymore, just because there's so many checks, so much red tape, the protocol doesn't work, and so on. So there's there's kind of, there's different stories there. But at the end of the day, what it is fueling is, I think, this kind of boom in cross-border trade.
And do you think, will this change be permanent? Like, they were massive increases that you spoke about, like in the trade between Ireland and Northern Ireland in particular. But when you talk about those elements, like say that the amount, like Brexit being the thing that's fueled it, do you think that that's going to, is that sustainable? Is this just kind of the immediate impact in like that happens after Brexit, or is this now opening up markets that are going to stay, that are going to be here for the sustainable future?
Yeah, I think it's probably too early to say. I mean, it's difficult to sort of draw concrete conclusions about whether this is kind of strengthening ties north and south and that kind of thing. And I think if you talk to any economist, and particularly, like, again, this is a case of good timing, because last week, the ESRI, IBEC, and the ESRI's equivalent in the UK launched this shared island, all Ireland economic project, which is kind of just a 3-year initiative to kind of properly study the all-island economy. But it's very difficult, and they'll tell you, to draw any definitive conclusions about these 9 months, because I think they have been so strange and so unusual, and I think it's going to be hard to draw those conclusions for a very long time. And also, I mean, while it seems to be strengthening these relationships business to business, north and south, I think like what a lot of people will tell you is that it's wrong to look at this as purely a sort of a boon for cross-border relationships, or for one reason in particular, which is that at the end of the day, we're talking, the North isn't in the EU and the Republic is, and the protocol doesn't cover all aspects of the Northern Ireland economy. It covers certain aspects of the Northern Ireland economy and keeps it within the single market. But there's other aspects that aren't. So, for example, qualification recognition is still another big issue, recognising professional qualifications from the UK. That was guaranteed under the single market. It's not guaranteed under the protocol. And businesses in the North say that this is a huge issue for them, especially if they want to try and do business in the Republic or elsewhere. So at the same time as it's strengthening ties, it's worth bearing in mind that it's also driving a wedge in another way, which is just in terms of we're in the European Union and they're not anymore. So
it's kind of fascinating as well, seeing that about how Northern Ireland has been able to leverage that and see that it's the only region that's able to have this access to both the EU and the UK markets at the same time. And I know the Financial Times has been writing about this, about how there's been like a boom in like companies opening up in Northern Ireland now because they see the possibilities for it, which I think is kind of a fascinating avenue for Northern Ireland to be looking to. Roland, just zooming out a little bit and kind of looking at where Ireland fits into all of this. Obviously, this is a difficult time for Ireland, being kind of navigating between what's going on between the UK and the EU. How important was the UK as an ally for Ireland within Europe? And I suppose related to that, like how does Ireland go about making sure that losing that ally doesn't hurt our interests within the EU now that they're gone?
Well, the UK was a central ally for Ireland within the European Union. I mean, we joined the European Union together in 1973, Ireland and the UK, when it was the EEC. There was only 6 members in the EEC at the time. So the UK was a huge part of the reason why Ireland joined in the beginning, in the sense that if they were to join, it was almost inevitable that we had to join. Of course, we had a referendum and stuff like that, but that was kind of the central issue for us at the time. And during that period, a lot of our interests, aligned. We had interests around CAP, around agriculture, around fishing, and latterly around financial services. Sorry, I have a dog here that's not exactly helping.
I was going to say, I can hear. The dog is welcome too. We want to hear all perspectives, both human and animal.
But and obviously there were many examples during that period of how Ireland and the UK's interests aligned. I mean, if you look, for example, at some of the opt-outs that Ireland opted out of from EU legislation around travel, Schengen, for example, Ireland and the UK jointly opt out of that arrangement so they could pursue their own common travel area. There were many areas where we had a joint position and our interests aligned. That's why you work closely together. And I think one of the things that has been spoken about in detail was how that also operated as the EU operated as kind of a forum for the improving bilateral relationships between Ireland and the UK, and that's something that was developed hugely with the Anglo-Irish Agreement in the 80s, and of course on to the Good Friday Agreement. And I think it's been said at the time, and how the EU was almost the house where the Good Friday Agreement was built, and that's why we've seen all the issues that Brian has outlined and we've discussed a lot of times over the past few years. That now that's gone, it's created those issues. But also what it's shown, I think, is that there has been a huge understanding and importance placed on Ireland's position within the EU, and we see the lengths that were gone to defend Ireland's position when it comes to the protocol and trade. And I think in many ways that might help Ireland going forward, in a sense that it forced Ireland's interests to be at the centre of Europe interests, and it showed that Ireland was a small country amongst 27 other member states, but when an issue that was vital for that country, Europe stepped up and kind of acted as one, and that in some ways has strengthened Ireland's relationship with Europe. We've seen that with polling, how Irish support for European Union and institutions is stronger than it's ever been. But I also think that that's been shown amongst Irish politicians and Irish diplomats who have been at the centre of things for the past couple of years and have been forced to develop those kind of alliances. There are some issues in which we will have to form new alliances and how things will change. I mentioned, for example, there how CAP used to be such an important part of Ireland Ireland's interactions with the EU, whereas now in the past couple of years, issues such as corporate taxation, which Ireland hasn't exactly been in lockstep with many of the countries in Europe on France, for example. That's a kind way
of putting it.
Like countries such as the Netherlands and Luxembourg, which have also see the inward investment from tech companies as so important to them. Ireland has been forced to kind of form alliances with them, and that I think is something that we will see going forward, even though Ireland has now signed up to the OECD agreement. And I think another way, where Ireland will seek to kind of carve out a niche in that regard is, I think I've heard Leo Varadkar speak recently about how his Global Ireland project, or his Global Ireland project he began about increasing Ireland's footprint diplomatically around the world. It's not that different to the global Britain we hear about Boris Johnson espousing. And so in that sense, we have similar interests in that regard, but we also act as a bridge to the United States, which Ireland has always sold itself as kind of a bridge between Europe and the United States. And with the Biden administration and the improving relations there, I think that's an area where Ireland will also seek to kind of show what it can do on a European level.
Yeah, that's such an interesting analysis. Yeah, there's so much there. Gráinne, I suppose kind of to pick that apart, not even pick it apart a little bit, but just to touch on something Ronan spoke about there. You know, part of the reason we chose this topic was about, after all the tensions around whether or not Article 16 was actually going to be triggered or not. Do you think that the British government was ever actually going to trigger it? And also, I suppose, kind of following on from that as well, it feels like such a sort of Damocles that's kind of hanging over everything all the time. Do you think that they ever actually will? You know, even if they, you know, whether or not they were going to this time, like, is it something that could happen?
So to the first one, were they going to trigger it? The UK government has a habit of threatening EU rhetoric whenever they're in trouble domestically and whenever they kind of need a boost at home. And it happened a lot during Brexit negotiations that things would flare up when things got tricky domestically. So that is an important context to whenever anything happens with Brexit, particularly coming from the UK media. You kind of have to look at the context at home to see how likely that threat is. Another element of Article 16 is that something Katie Hayward said to me in an interview, the social scientist from Queen's University, which is that Article 16 is more useful as a threat than actually triggering it, because that only triggers another round of negotiations and maybe a mini trade war, a kind of a tit for tat retaliation on the specific issues the UK government would have with the protocol or the way it works. And that might be temporary. So at the end of the day, they still have to negotiate. And we've been through 4 years of them. So that leaves Anglo-Irish relations in quite a tricky position where you have this kind of strong anti-EU rhetoric from the UK, because that is Brexit. That's the kind of environment it's in at the moment. And the Ireland wanted to be a kind of a central player in Europe. And so that leaves, as MEP Barry Cowan said, Ireland as a translator for both sides, translating between the EU and the UK so they understand each other more. Because at the end of the day, Ireland doesn't have the luxury of sidelining either of them, particularly the UK, because of the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, the shared kind of territory on the island. So because of that, even if tensions do wrap up with Article 16, Ireland is going to have to be the one taking a step back and keeping everything at an even rate, because there's no other option really, politically or practically.
Yeah. I think just when you said Barry Cowan, I think Barry Andrews was the MEP who said that.
Barry Andrews.
For a second, I was like, oh, Barry Cowan, a promotion, I think, for him there. Am I right in saying that the UK government hasn't actually put forward anything solid or concrete that could go in the protocol's place?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is fair. They have a command paper that kind of give vague ideas about how it would work. And what I mean by vague is unfettered access to British goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, but it's not clear about what kind of unfettered access is. That's actually very vague in trade terms. And they acknowledge that there shouldn't be a border on the island of Ireland, but they don't want one in the Irish Sea either. So that is kind of a vague place upon which to do negotiations with the EU on. And, they've been asked if they trigger the Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, they need to be specific about why they're triggering it, what aspects over which are they triggering it. And they haven't hinted even at what aspects of it they would trigger it over. So that has kind of led to this is why the EU says that they are the only ones putting forward solutions, putting forward details and options, I suppose, for how the protocol could be tweaked that keep a border off the island of Ireland and keep the Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom's kind of sphere of trade rules. But that's a very difficult thing to do, and there's a limited amount of options and ways to do that. And it's not really clear which ones the UK government find acceptable, if any, that please both sides.
Yeah, and there's also the question of Northern Ireland having a voice in this too. We saw, like, I think last month or the month before, there was a poll in the North about support for the protocol, and it was something like, I think 52% of people said they strongly agreed that it was good for Northern Ireland, and 42% disagreed, were on the complete opposite side. And that feels like a voice that isn't quite being part of the conversations around, the protocol, or what could replace it potentially as well. Ronan, I was going to come to you and just kind of talk a little bit more broadly about, when we're talking about the context in which Brexit happened, like, even though Britain has left the EU, it's not like Euroscepticism just ended, like that they achieved everything and now it doesn't exist as a concept anymore. There's still MEPs within the European Parliament who have this kind of sense of questioning or probing the EU and its structures. Like, is there anything to be learned from what happened with Brexit in terms of how the EU maybe incorporates those views, but in a more constructive way, rather than like kind of the destructive approach that Brexit took?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you talk about destructive and constructive, because I think that's one way that certain academics who speak about the EU kind of look at it in that regard. I spoke to Professor Adrienne Ripoll of Salzburg Centre of European Studies there, and she kind of explained it as a hard Eurosceptic and a soft Eurosceptic. A hard Eurosceptic might be somebody who wants to leave the EU or opposes the existence of the EU, whereas a soft Eurosceptic might be opposed to some of the goals, or perhaps as opposed to some of the policies, and in that kind of way can contribute in a way that's a bit more constructive, almost acting as a kind of an opposition in a traditional sense, as you would have within any kind of parliament. And that's something we're all familiar with, but it isn't necessarily how the European Parliament operates. Ahead of the last European elections in 2019, I think we can remember there was a big kind of concern among pro-Europeans and MEPs that there would be this big surge among populism and Eurosceptic parties. It didn't happen to the extent that perhaps was predicted, or perhaps it was feared if you're at that persuasion, because there was a huge turnout, and perhaps that kind of guarded against it. I think there were some estimates that about 31% of people elected to the European Parliament were to be regarded as Eurosceptic. That perhaps reduced a little. I know it sounds almost strange that you would have almost a third of people in the Parliament who are opposed to it. That reduced slightly when, of course, the Brexit Party, they had 29 MEPs, and they're now gone along with the rest of the UK MEPs. When it comes to Ireland in this regard, we have a number of MEPs who bristle at the term Eurosceptic. Mick Wallace and Claire Daly, for example, I think they were described as Eurosceptic in Irish Times article last year, and they sent a letter to the editor saying, no, we're not Eurosceptic, we're people who are very critical of EU decisions, and we have a democratic mandate to be critical of decisions taken in the EU. I mean, that's something I would hope to discuss as part of this project, to see if they could outline a little bit more what they term to be positive Euroscepticism in that regard, or constructive Euroscepticism in that regard. I think what is also one thing that's been interesting to watch over the past couple of years, and will be something that's interesting, particularly over the next 6 months, is that Euroscepticism in many regards has retreated to the domestic sphere. You look at Poland, for example, where it's a central element to their government policies, and Hungary, for example, which the entire of Europe is watching what's happening in Europe, and we do have elections coming up, parliamentary elections in Hungary in the coming months, and whether or not Orban and his brand of populism and Euroscepticism can be defeated or emboldened as a result of those elections. That's something that we will look at in the next few months to see if you know if that fear that in 2019 was the year where we would see the surge, has that kind of fear subsided, or will it return, or will it be emboldened by, you know, say a strong performance in Hungary, or indeed by Marine Le Pen in France?
Yeah, and I guess following on from that, can I ask all three of you, what are your predictions for the coming year when it comes to kind of post-Brexit, Ireland's relationship with the EU and the UK? Like, is there anything that you can see happening next year? Anything you're optimistic about? Anything you're pessimistic about? That's, you know, we'll be a broad church here. Anything?
I have to say I would agree with Grainne's analysis that a lot of which happens in Brexit is not a lot of what happened in Brexit, but can be influenced by domestic politics in the UK. And at the moment, you know, we're seeing a Boris Johnson that is under more pressure than we've seen him before in his tenure as Prime Minister. And there are suggestions that perhaps the reason why they didn't, you know, use Article 16 was because he didn't have the political capital that he had a few months ago. Or, you know, you could make the opposite argument that Brexit could perhaps be used as a distraction for domestic politics within the UK. So I think over the next few months, we will be able to get a clearer idea of perhaps how, you know, Johnson and the Conservative Party looking towards this issue. And it might give us some kind of an idea about how the rest of 2022 will play out.
Yeah, I read there was a great quote from one of the Conservative MPs who came in after Brexit, and he was interviewed the other week and was saying about how, like, he said something like, nobody in my constituency is talking about Northern Ireland or Article 16. We have to stop talking about Brexit and move on. And it was that, it's kind of going back to something Grainne said earlier about, you know, when you've got like climate change, like inflation, supply chain issues, you know, sleaze problems, like when there's a lot of other things happening, suddenly Brexit falls down the agenda an awful lot in a way that a few years ago it wouldn't have, but now it seems to be far less of a priority, except for when it's needed for cover or anything like that.
The other thing that can happen is they can threaten, they say will definitely trigger Article 16 and they cannot do it, and there's no political backlash for it one way or another, which is a magic trick the UK government have done repeatedly, promise one thing and do the opposite, and there's no political backlash for it, possibly because the British public don't particularly are checked out on the issue. That's why they voted for Boris Johnson and his party, arguably, in 2019. So that's very much at the whim of you know, the ball in the UK court. But the other side of it is the EU have, you know, one of the things we heard from the very start of Brexit is that the EU won't stick by Ireland on the protocol on Northern Ireland, and they have so far. And those questions have come back recently again, and haven't kind of rang true. So there is the strategy of holding firm, to borrow that phrase from the UK Health Service. It kind of has worked for the EU so far. And probably, you know, that same kind of steady, even keel from the Irish government, with the odd maybe attacking interview from Simon Coveney, is probably how things will go on going forward.
Yeah, I think if I had to sort of predict anything, I suppose Grainne has kind of already sort of touched on it, just in relation to the, you know, the things that have been delayed, right? So obviously Britain was supposed to start checking goods coming from the European Union immediately after the withdrawal period ended. They postponed it to March. They postponed it from March to September, and they've postponed it again, I think, till the new year, and we're not entirely sure when that's going to happen. I think there's a very good chance that that gets postponed again at some point. It's just a question of, I suppose, the wider economic picture, the wider issues that they're having, literally getting goods into the country and moving goods around the country. I don't think they're going to be willing to do that for the time being. But I think that when it is done, what we can see is this, you know, direct trade between Ireland and Europe blossoming even further, which it's already done in the past 9 months. I think you're going to increasingly see Irish businesses look for new customers. A lot of what's happening now, and a lot of what's being captured in the port statistics, seems to be businesses just wanting to skip the land bridge and going directly to Europe. But I think what you're going to see, if you do start seeing Britain checking goods from the European Union, you know, from Ireland, is we are going to see Irish businesses just increasingly trying to find customers in France, in Spain, in Germany, and so on. So I think that's something to keep an eye on over the next 12 months.
Yeah. Thanks so much to all three of you. This was such a good discussion. I feel like like I learned so much. I hope the audience got a lot out of it. So thanks to Grania, Ronan, Ian, and Zizi, Ronan's dog, who joined us for the full part as well, who had his own take on things. So thanks so much to everyone for being here. We'd love to hear from you about what you'd like to see us covering as part of this topic on the Good Information Project, looking at Brexit. It's very much reader-led, so please do give us a shout if you do have any thoughts or comments. It can be suggestions for stories, topics you'd like us to look at, or just something you'd like us to bear in mind with our coverage. You can get in touch by emailing us at tips@thejournal.ie. You can tweet us at @thejournal_IE, or you can go to the site, sign up for the newsletter, which we put out every week on the Good Information Project, and you can write back to us on that and let us know what you'd like to see. We have some really strong articles coming up on the site this week and over the coming month, so please do keep an eye out for them on the site. Thanks, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.